and welcome to Encouraging Leadership, conversations that mobilize today's women leaders, with your host, Ann Miner. Meet leaders who share their observations, knowledge, insight, and perspectives to mobilize you to apply your own leadership in business and in life. Here's your host, Ann Miner.
Our conversation today is with Claire Beckton. Claire is founding executive director of the Center for Women in Politics and Public Leadership. She's also the author of Own It, Your Success, Your Future, Your Life. Claire is a passionate advocate for the advancement of gender-inclusive leadership, a former senior executive who led large organizations, a connector, sought-after speaker, and multiple award winner, including twice as one of the top 100 most powerful women in Canada. Claire, welcome.
Great to be here, Anne.
Well, I am so glad that you're here to share your perspectives, and we'll just dive right in with the first question. Why is women's leadership important?
Well, women's leadership is important for many reasons. One being women are 50% of the population. Women bring multiple and different perspectives to the table than men. And of course, with the complexity of the issues we face in today's world, if we don't have a multiplicity of perspectives, we're not going to be making the best decision making, irrespective of what are the decisions that we have to look at. And we know that women bring different approaches around leadership in many cases as well.
So can you give us some examples of the different approaches that you've observed?
Well, women have tended to be, and I don't say it's with all women, because you can't categorize in that way, but women tend to be more collaborative. They tend to focus on how they're leading, and they tend to focus also on the well-being of the people that they're leading, trying to create that culture of support and advancement. And of course, there are men who lead like that as well, but that tends to be more of what you've seen and what was often described as the softer sides of leadership, which of course is the strength of leadership today.
Well, exactly. I remember back to when I entered the workforce, and I think the leadership style of the day was command and control. And over the years have seen that commanding and attempting to control are futile exercises, particularly with the generations entering the workforce today.
I don't think it was ever an effective approach because while people might have done things out of fear, they wouldn't give you their best because you were not tapping into what they cared about, what they were passionate about, and they didn't necessarily want to respond to you. They did it because they had to, and that's not the way to lead. And it's certainly, as you said, it doesn't work in today's society. The people at the top do not have all the answers. And if they think they do, they're not going to be engaged in effective leadership.
Well, exactly. And I think it would be fair to say that although women were mentored by that, if you like, old style model, we very quickly learned that it didn't fit for us. And that if we brought our collaborative approach, that we often could achieve more, and it would be a more positive experience for all of the people participating.
I think this, Anne, you've hit the nail on the head, but it's been a challenge for women, and it continues to be a challenge in some sectors, that the ability to bring our whole self to the table. Early women going through, and many of you, I think, can think of Maggie Thatcher and other, famous leaders, felt they had to be tougher than men to achieve in their environment, and they gave up on their feminine side. I think what we encourage and want for everybody today, whether you're woman or man, is to bring your whole self to the...
Well, hello, Claire. I'm sorry we lost you there just for a moment.
Yes, we did.
I'm so sorry about that. I was just remarking in your absence about, bringing our best to the table, involving being our authentic best self. And authenticity is something that we're hearing as a term more and more in leadership circles. I wonder if you could comment on that as well.
Yes, I guess when I was talking to empty air when I was speaking, but authenticity is bringing who you are to the table, being comfortable in your own skin, because people don't trust people if they don't see them living the talk, if they're not walking the talk. And that's what authenticity is about. If you say things and then your actions follow, people will believe that you're authentic. And so often we've seen where people do not walk the talk.
Well, and trust amongst all of us is such a fundamental factor in having a successful collaboration.
Yes, and I think if I don't know if you've read any of the works of Simon Sinek, but he's written several books, and starting with the Why, but his second one is Leaders Eat Last. And what he talks about a lot is that whole, how do you create an atmosphere of trust? And it's that atmosphere of trust and safety which will allow people to do their very best work and put their very best self forward. And an authentic leader tries to create that environment of trust, of security for the people who are following that leader, and you're trying to empower them and get the best from them.
Right, and to serve them by making the environment conducive, whether that means providing the tools or the empowerment, the authority, the creative atmosphere so that they can bring their best selves forward.
Right. I mean, I think people, in order to bring their best selves forward, have to feel that they're trusted, that it's a safe environment, and that they have the freedom to make mistakes, which is something that is so important in creating an environment of trust. If I feel I'm going to get blamed for everything that happens, then I'm less likely to have trust in my leaders and be able to work at my best.
Well, exactly. And that leads us to kind of the next topic I wanted to chat with you about, and that is this issue of, a perspective that there aren't enough, or there aren't as many competent women available for leadership roles, and what women themselves are doing to kind of support that perception by not speaking up.
Yeah, I think that there's no shortage of very competent women for leadership roles. That has been a myth that's been around for quite some time. But when you look around and you look at things like the Canadian Board Diversity Council's Diversity 50, they have over 150 names now, the majority of which are women, which have been pre-cleared for boards alone. Not all for corporate boards, but for many boards. And you and I both belong to an organization called International Women's Forum, which is full of high-performance women. So it's not a question of a lack of women for the roles. It is women don't always think to apply, and sometimes when they do apply and they're turned down the first time, they don't keep applying, which we know you have to do for some of these particular roles. You have to put your name out there, and maybe you won't get the first one, but your name is then out there and something else comes up. I think we also need to have women encouraging and promoting, and men as well, encouraging and promoting the competent women in their lives to apply for these positions. And also to work with the companies that are looking at hiring more women to say, look beyond the normal places. Like attracts like. And what you want to really do is attract people who are unlike you. And that requires using your recruiting firms or your HR looking in different places than you've traditionally looked, and looking for people who, when you look in the mirror, you don't see yourself.
Well, exactly. And, pretty early on in my own leadership life, I learned this lesson. think of yourself as the small doll in the Russian doll.
Hmm.
You know a Russian doll?
Oh,
Where
yes.
as you open it, each doll they're exactly the same, but they're smaller. And what I saw other people doing was to hire in their own likeness, but not quite as good. And that created an organization where the leader always had to have all the answers because they were the greatest source of knowledge. But if we could reverse that and think of bringing people into our organization who have skills beyond what we ourselves have, experience, expertise beyond, different points of view, different backgrounds, different personality profiles, that the sort of the gestalt of all of that was so much more powerful than the Russian doll approach.
Absolutely. And what my philosophy was always, I want to hire people who are smarter than me and who have the skill sets that I don't have, because that makes the perfect complement. Certainly, there's no way that a leader can know more than the people that are working for them or with them nowadays, because there's so much access to information. No one person can control information like you could do once upon a time, and that's something that technology and the internet has done. But also, if you don't bring in the people with that diversity of skills, diversity of thinking, diversity of perspectives, you're not going to do very well in terms of dealing with the kind of complex challenges that are facing you every day. We know that those kind of complex challenges require different approaches to finding solutions, and you don't find it by having groupthink or same think in the room. There's also, as you know, Anne, there's a lot of studies out there that look at what's the impact of having more women and diversity in the senior levels of private sector organizations. And what we found, of course, is the impact of that is the better results for those organizations, higher profits, higher returns on investments. And that's really significant.
Well, absolutely. And the more that we read and the more that we hear about the impact that gender diversity specifically gender diversity, is having on organizations, the more important it is for us as gender, for women in particular, to be courageous in speaking up about the contribution that we can make, that the contributions we have made, and what our own readiness is to step into an increased or higher level of leadership position.
Yes, and that's a real challenge for a lot of women, because we were brought up to be humble, we were brought up to be nice and not to tout our accomplishments. However, there are times when you do need to tout your accomplishments, and if you're applying for different roles or if you're looking at performance time, if you don't tout your accomplishments, people aren't going to know what you've done, and they're not necessarily going to want to engage you because they can't see what you have done. You can't rely on other people to say what you have done. And I think it's important, and this is why I very much applaud organizations that are highlighting the accomplishments of women. For example, like WXN's Top 100, Canadian Women in Communications and Technology, just to name a few that have awards that highlight the accomplishments of women, because there are so many out there. And when there are awards that are given to both men and women are often left out in terms of those awards or receive far fewer of them. So it is really important. And speaking out is not always easy, as you know, Anne. It's learning to be able to frame how you speak out so you can be heard, and be prepared for some of the feedback that comes your way, which is not always pleasant.
Isn't that true? And for women, I think it's particularly challenging to view feedback as exactly that. It's feedback. It is, you don't need to believe it. You don't need to feel badly about it. You simply need to accept it as feedback, give it due consideration, because often there is a nugget of value in every piece of feedback we get, but not to be crushed by it when it doesn't sound like or look like praise.
Well, I think feedback is our friend, and we need feedback because we all have blind spots. And that feedback can help us solicit those blind spots, and because those blind spots are what might be holding us back. So absolutely, as you say, you need to consider the feedback. Don't take it personally. But if you do have to go home and have a cry, well, go home and have a cry, but then get back up again and say, okay, what am I going to do about this feedback? How much of it do I think is real? Maybe I need to verify it with other people who I know will be honest with me, because that's how you learn and grow. I had some really tough feedback earlier on in my career, but it certainly helped me grow and develop over the years. You will also get the kind of feedback when you speak out, like I do sometimes, from what I call the internet trolls. And I think a lot of those you've just got to let go because they're nasty, vindictive, and sometimes misogynist.
Well, yes, and we need to be brave and just simply, step forward. And, I think this is such an important point, Claire. We often look at the requirements for a position, and there is a study, I think it was done by Hewlett-Packard, where the evidence showed that men were much more willing to apply for a position with incomplete credentials. So they didn't have the full set of 10 criteria. Maybe they didn't even have 50% of them. But they would put themselves forward and with the belief that they could learn on the job and bring skills from other areas. Whereas women were reluctant even with 9 out of 10 of the criteria. That, we play very literally and don't appear to have the same creative confidence that we can, generalize, bring skills from other areas, redeploy what we've learned, and value what we do know and what we can bring. And as long as we hold ourselves back, it won't matter if the systemic barriers are torn down. We still won't achieve the position of parity that we'd like to see.
Yes, and what you're saying, Anne, is correct. Women often don't put their name forward unless they have all of them, and I would certainly say if you have all 10, you're already overqualified and the job's not likely to be of challenge for you. At the same time, there is a reality, and it's almost like an unconscious bias, that men are often judged on their potential and women on their experience. So the system has rewarded these men saying, well, they don't have it all, but they have potential. So we're going to give them the job. But we don't say that for the women. We say, oh, well, she really hasn't had any experience in this area, so I guess she's not going to be ready for that job. So it's more than simply what women have been doing. It's what the system has been rewarding as well. And this is one of the areas that's really important for organizations to be looking at. It was the head partner at Deloitte who said he used to do that, and he's a pretty progressive guy. But he said, I realized I was judging the women differently than the men, so I had to become very aware of it. So having people in an organization who will challenge the recruiters, challenge those that are looking at the CVs and saying, why are you saying this about this woman and this about this man, when they both have those qualifications.
Yes, exactly. And I have to confess that, I too found myself fighting against that, what would be unconscious bias when it's brought to your awareness. And I was horrified that, in fact, I did myself look at women and men quite differently. And so developed a practice of removing the names from the CV. So I don't want to see the name. I just want to see their qualifications. And that helped. That helped a lot.
And it's been shown they even have done case studies at Harvard where they call the woman Justina in one case study and they call the person Justin in the other, and people will rate the person higher when they're called Justin, even though objectively there's absolutely nothing different about their qualifications. So, and we all have those unconscious biases, and I think what happens in the world of stereotype, and that's something we need to work with, is as women, we embody those cultural stereotypes as well, and we have to become very self-aware that we are making those assumptions as you did, or that we've embodied that stereotype. And in order to change it, it has to come into our conscious awareness, and we have to think about it every time we're taking an action or we're looking at hiring someone, for example, or helping someone hire someone.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Now, Claire, one of the things that you are so well known for is mentoring, that you are a mentorship master. I wonder if you would share your perspective on the value of mentorship.
I think mentorship is invaluable because it's not only valuable for the person that you're mentoring, sharing what you've learned, helping them to avoid pitfalls, but you learn as well. Every time that you mentor someone, you learn from them because they're bringing a different perspective to the table. It's certainly, I mentor women and young men too, but also women of all ages. And I find that I learn a lot, particularly with the younger generation, because they're looking at the world through a different lens. And it certainly helps me keep my perspective on the multi-generations that we live and work with on a daily basis. But I think the evidence also shows that when women are mentored, they are going to do better. And adding to that, what's important in organizations is not only that women have a mentor, but they're sponsored by senior members of the organization so that they can take advantage of opportunities they wouldn't otherwise get. Men have been very good at sponsoring other men, but they haven't so often thought about the women in their organization. And there is a difference between mentoring and sponsoring, because sponsoring is putting that person forward for opportunities.
Yes, and sponsoring has a much higher element of risk attached to it, doesn't it?
Well, you certainly are only going to sponsor someone when you're pretty confident that they have the abilities. I mean, I do it, and I do it because I know the person and I know that they have great ability, and they might not otherwise get that opportunity if I wasn't pushing them forward. And I think that that's really important. It's also important that women in organizations do things to get noticed so that they will have a better opportunity of getting sponsored. When you're involved in something and someone has seen the quality of your work, they're much more likely to want to sponsor you.
Well, that leads to a conversation about the role of your volunteer work in contributing to creating that credibility for yourself. Now, people often tell me that, their contribution when they're a volunteer is less, it's less compelling for them than it would be if it was a paid position. What's your perspective on the importance of your performance in a volunteer capacity?
Oh, I think a volunteer capacity should be approached the same way as you would a work capacity. You want to give it your very best, and there's a tremendous amount of learning that can happen from volunteer opportunities. I served on a hospital board recently and ended up being the chair, and I learned a great deal, even though I had led very large organizations. What you can learn safely from volunteering and being engaged with volunteer organizations, you can then carry back into the workplace. You may not have the opportunities to grow some of your skills in your current workplace, but you have that opportunity through volunteering to grow some of their skills, those particular skills, while still serving the organization that you're giving your time and energy to, advancing their cause. So I think it's really important that volunteer work can be so important in enhancing skills and building your networks, because you're going to encounter people that you would probably never meet in your current organization or in your existing network.
Well, isn't that just the truth? I mean, whether it's an organization like the Parent Teacher Council or working on a committee that's examining some social question, or being a volunteer within a membership organization like the YWCA or the YMCA, or as you and I both are, and part of the International Women's Forum, that not only does it heighten your opportunity to learn and expand your network, it also heightens your opportunity to be visible to those who might be aware of other opportunities for you to, again, deploy your skills at a higher level. How many times have you heard, oh, I worked with that, I worked with that person on whatever project, and man, were they competent.
Exactly, because you never know where your next opportunity is coming from. And if you've done great work on a volunteer board, and there are people on that board, obviously, who come from different organizations and different backgrounds, when they're thinking about someone for a particular role, or someone asks them about you for a particular role, they're going to have a knowledge that no one in your workplace would ever have about the kind of skills that you were using in that workplace. And so there can be tremendous benefit from your volunteer activities. And I think so often when you volunteer, you meet people from sectors and from places you would never otherwise meet them.
Well, exactly. So for those of you out there who might think of your scenario on a volunteer board or within a committee as just volunteering, we want you to look upon that as having a very important contribution to make, not only to the community, but to your own career path forward.
I fully agree with that, Anne. I think it's so important that people can see themselves serving the community, as well as in the process of enjoying and serving your community, acquiring tremendous skills and building your networks.
Right, and if we circle back to the book you mentioned earlier by Simon Sinek of Leaders Eat Last, that book was so enlightening about the approach, the servant leader approach, that our purpose as leaders is to serve the world, the population, and our community in ways that benefit more than just ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. If you're a leader who's in it only for yourself and you don't have a larger purpose, you're not going to be an effective leader, and you're not likely going to be able to inspire people to achieve the goals that you might have. I mean, leadership is really about empowering others. It's empowering others to get the best from them and to achieve goals that obviously are going to be for the betterment of whatever organization and community we're serving. And you really do notice that. You notice the difference between a leader who's out for themselves and someone who is genuinely trying to do what is best for the organization and the community, and in many cases the world as a whole.
Well, that is a great place for us to wrap up, Claire. Thank you so very much for your perspectives and insights. Now, if our listeners would like to connect with you, I know they can find you on Facebook as Claire, C-L-A-R-E, Beckton, B-E-C-K-T-O-N, or on Twitter, where your handle is Own It, the title of your book, OWNIT_Claire, C-L-A-R-E. Is there any place else you would like our listeners to contact you, Claire?
Well, usually I'm not. Facebook, I'm tightly controlled, but I'm on LinkedIn. And also they can always send me an email at clare.beckton@carleton.ca. We have the center's website as well, which is www.carleton.ca/CWPPL.
Great. And listeners, Carleton is Carleton.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will join us every Thursday at 1 p.m. for Encouraging Leadership, conversations to mobilize today's women leaders.
Thank you for listening to Encouraging Leadership. To learn more about our host, Ann Miner, and the Acacia Institute, please visit acaciainstitute.com. Join us next week at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, for more Encouraging Leadership. In the meantime, be courageous.